the anti-racist campaign was never one about toppling statues or changing street names, and that's not my agenda either.
And let's just scrap the distractions and actually focus, on really remedying the damage which has been caused on Black lives.
It's been a tumultuous year since the statue of slave trader Edward Colston was pulled down from its plinth during a Black Lives Matter march on the 7th of June. For some, this was a watershed moment, an opportunity for the city to really reckon with its history and racism past and present. For others, it was erasing history and a threat to national identity. What is certain is that that day set in motion a series of events that has unveiled deep-rooted divisions in the city. Just a few days after the Colston statue was toppled, tombstones marking the grave of 18-year-old enslaved African Scipio Africanus was vandalised in an apparent revenge attack. Put the Colston statue back, the graffiti read, or things will really heat up. And similarly, here in St. Paul's, the statue of Alfred Fagin, the first and only statue in the city to commemorate a black man, had a corrosive substance poured on it, apparently to turn the black statue white. After the Colston statue was pulled down, his name was pulled from buildings too. Colston Hall became Bristol Beacon, Colston Tower became Beacon Tower, and Colston School is currently undergoing a name change. In September, the council set up the We Are Bristol History Commission to build a shared, improved understanding of Bristol's history. As part of this, an exhibition at the M Shed has just opened called The Colston Statue, What Next? Some people who were saying, like in the All Lives Matter march, that this is erasing our history. How do you come back to that kind of an accusation?
First and foremost, a statue isn't history. A statue is a very particular moment where a decision was made, to put something up, but taking that away isn't erasing history. More people know about Colston and are talking about Colston since he's come down than he ever was when he was still put up there. So you could actually go to the empty plinth now and you see people stopping, having a conversation about what happened. One of the big questions is what's changed? And I don't think anything structurally has changed, but what I do see is a shift in conversation.
Notably absent from the exhibition in the M Shed is any mention of the notorious Society of the Merchant Venturers, which Colston was a part of. This group lobbied Parliament to allow the enslavement and trafficking of Africans and played a pivotal role in delaying the abolition of the slave trade. They still exist and wield an influence in the city today, largely responsible for upholding the cult of Colston.
Ever since I've been in the city, there's been conversations around inequalities and injustice, and it's the same old. There is something a bit perverse, I think, and also disconcerting about the display at the M Shed. When you think, okay, you've got a huge footfall there. Isn't the whole point of him coming down is to give visibility to Black lives historically? There's no memorial or talk of a memorial emerging. Wouldn't that have been nice to have opened up a year later and just say this is what's happening? But no, there's more discussion, more debate, and I just think, well, how much more discussion and debate?
We have serious problems here in Bristol with the City Council, with housing. We have problems with education. They're immediate. They're the problems that are affecting us today. And for some reason, the toppling of a certain statue seems to have taken us back into the dark ages. Let's address the issues that are dividing the city now, where people are being marginalised and victimised just for the way they look. That's real, that's today, that's what we'd like to address. Yeah, so it just seems that old Ed, you know what I mean? You have no relevance, mate. That's the problem. But they're going to make it all about him so we don't address the real problems, while those problems continue daily.
Campaigners are demanding reparations for the immense harm caused during the slave trade. People think reparations just means money, but actually it's a much wider, broader call for psychological, societal and political amends. I mean, one thing that did happen in this last year is that a reparations motion was passed through Bristol City Council.
So March 2nd, 2021, in Bristol, was the first atonement reparations motion that actually spoke to acknowledging and submitting to the leadership of African heritage communities in terms of what repair should look like, what the plan should be.
Not everyone was thrilled about the Colston statue coming down. In fact, the very next week, people gathered to defend the cenotaph in fear that activists would come for a different piece of history next. Across the UK and across the world, as statues of slave traders were being pulled down, others gathered to defend the statues that they felt under threat.
Have you seen white people that are so poor they can't feed their children? Have you seen white poverty? If you have, all life matters.
On March the 10th, the government responded with the Police and Crime Bill, which raises the maximum sentence for criminal damage to a statue to up to 10 years. There's also kind of like a national conversation that's happening. So thinking about the progress that we're trying to make in this city, and then the Sewell report comes out and says there's no institutional racism.
The anti-racist campaign was never one about toppling statues or changing street names, and that's not my agenda either. The issues around the Colston statue are much bigger than the Colston statue itself. Yeah, it's about racial equality, disparity within society, educational attainment gaps, criminal justice system, stats, it's about all these things. And the statue is just a symbol of how a city was celebrating one thing and not paying attention to something else.
In the early days of Surrey, in the early 90s, we saw a lot of very physical attacks and really unpleasant racist verbal abuse being used, and it feels like it's gone back there again. In the last couple of weeks we've been getting 20 or more referrals a day, and I can't think of a time like that. So, and the majority, by no means all, but about 70% are race hate.
There has been an increase in reporting of hate crime, and that is probably following the BLM campaign, because people got aware, found us through that campaign, that there was support available in Bristol for victims of hate crime.
There's a rise in far-right extremism, there's a rise in people who are kind of getting radicalised on the other side of the coin. And I think it's because people, as there's more activism, as more people are getting on board and saying more needs to be done, and genuinely wanting to recognise the high-level existence of racism, at the same time you've got people feeling very threatened by that, because they are seeing not just Black and Asian people getting on board, but an increasing number of white British communities saying we don't want to tolerate this either. And I think that can feel quite threatening to some of those people.
About 2 years ago, there was a display that went up in the Georgian House, and there's a board with names of enslaved people. So that actually moved from, these enslaved or slaves, as the narrative often goes, to actual individual people. If you spend any time, once you get up how many flights of stairs to the top room, and stare. I don't know if they're actually directing people from the display of Colston to that. It's humbling, but there was no media. It kind of puts into proportion what's important and what isn't important, but calls upon all of us to actually reflect on our humanity in the midst of inhumanity and inequality.
So what's next? For the statue itself, Bristol City Council and its History Commission will consult the public and decide. For the so-called Colston Four, who were charged with pulling the statue down at the protest last year, they go to trial at the end of the year. And what's next for the anti-racism movement in the city? Well, the jury's still out. For some, toppling of Colston and Black Lives Matter provide a much-needed impetus for tackling racism in the city. On the other hand, some people say that all this talk about statues is distracting from the much more important conversation that needs to happen around structural change. And I think there's something in that. The story doesn't end Colston, because meanwhile the issue of racial inequality in the city is still here.